A couple of months back, I went looking for a good alluvial clays in the Gila River Valley. I spent all day traveling along the north side of the Gila in the Safford area, and I collected 6 brown alluvial clays from that area. Now today, I'm finally going to get down to testing those samples I collected then. So in this video, we're going to look at how to know whether a clay you've collected is good for building pottery, how to test those samples to know which one is best. So if you're ready, let's get started testing those clay samples. The first thing I have to do to test these clays is to grind them up into a powder. So I'm going to use this corn grinder. Now this is a Mexican grain mill. It's made for things like corn, but it works great for clays and even for rocks. So I grind up not only my clays in this, but my tempers, things like sand or stones, and even pigment minerals I grind up in this corn grinder. So first I need to turn all 6 of these samples into powder. And before I do that, they have to be completely dry. But they've been sitting and drying in open bags for a couple months, so they should be plenty dry. But if your clay is a little damp, you need to dry it before you can pass it through the corn grinder. One down, 5 to go. After I finish grinding each sample, I put it back into its numbered bag so I know which sample it is. If a clay is not fully dry, it gums up my corn grinder. And that's what happened with this one sample. I don't know why, maybe the plastic bag wasn't closed correctly, but it was not dry. It's impossible to push it through. And so what I did was I put it on a cookie sheet, I put it in the oven and heated it up and dried it out pretty quickly. And then it was able to grind it. Okay, I got all 6 samples ground into powder now. Now there's different ways to do this. You don't have to do the dry processing, but I dry process my clay. So I'm looking for a clay that will work good processed in this manner. If you wet process clay, feel free to wet process your samples, but it's going to take longer to get results. I'm going to be able to test all of these in one day. If you're wet processing, it's probably going to take you several days to a week. So now in the next step of this, I have to temper these clays. Now I don't know how much temper to add to these clay samples. So I'm just going to try a basic standard 20% by volume. And that's because that's an amount that works for most native clays. And then I'm going to be able to tell by the way it feels as I'm working with these, whether or not it maybe could use a little less or a little more temper. But that's a good place to start. 4 scoops of ground clay to 1 scoop of sand. That's a fraction of 1/5 or a ratio of 4 to 1. That gives you a clay with 20% temper. Once I have the clay and sand measured out, I'm ready to moisten it. Just create a small depression in the top, pour in some water, and then start bringing the clay up around it. Make sure the water all gets absorbed by the clay. Then knead it thoroughly so that it's one cohesive mass. You can add a little water if it needs it. And then when you're done, put it back in the sample bag. So again, we remember what sample number it is. And then repeat these steps 5 more times until all of the samples are processed. Yeah, it's not a small job, but what value is a really good clay body to you? It's worth the time and effort, believe me. Okay, I've got all 6 of these clay samples mixed up and ready to go. I'm going to let them sit wrapped in the plastic bag overnight. That way they can get as plastic as possible before I do anything with them. And then tomorrow, I'm going to make a little pot out of each one of these and kind of get an idea of their working properties. I already have a pretty good idea about which ones I'm going to like and those that I'm not, just based on mixing it up. But I'm going to withhold judgment until they have a chance to sit, become more plastic, and I'll try them tomorrow. Let me tell you something funny about my clay collecting trip to the Gila Valley. I collected the first 2 clays, and then when I went to collect the 3rd clay, I somehow in my mind thought this was the 4th clay. So I actually numbered the samples 1, 2, 4, 5, 6. And I thought I had 6 samples. And at the very end of the video, I recorded the outro and I said, I have 6 samples of clay here. And I didn't. What I had was 5 samples of clay and a sample of salt that I collected at some salt springs I found along the way. And that probably threw me off. So after I recorded the outro, I was on my way back home, and as I was crossing the Gila, I saw a spot where I could stop and go down by the river. And I found some decent clay down there. So I actually did collect 6 samples of clay, but they were numbered 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, and then the last one I actually numbered X because I wasn't sure what to number it. So in this experiment, as you see the samples and the numbers, keep in mind that there is no sample 3. And at the end, after 6, there is an X, which is kind of 3, but also kind of 7. Okay, this clay is sat and aged for almost 24 hours now. My goal today is going to be to make 6 little test bowls out of this clay, all about the same size and shape. Now, a lot of people make test tiles, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I find I get a much better feel for how good the clay is for making pottery by making a small bowl or a jar out of it. And so today, I'm making 6 little test bowls. Once I've got those 6 bowls made, I'm going to let them dry, and then I'm going to fire them for the final test to see how good these clays are. I'm not looking for perfection here, and I'm not looking for authenticity either. I just want to make 6 little bowls in the easiest, fastest way I know how, and I want them all to be around the same size. So I'm using the same pookie for all of these, and basically just kind of slab building them. I'm rolling a few little coils just for the rim area, but mostly they're just a slab built bowl. And then again, the real important thing here, because I'm testing samples, is keeping track of what samples these are. So I'm putting the number on the bottom of each bowl as I finish them so I can keep track of which sample that represents. And then I'm also taking brief notes on each clay as I finish the pot so I can write down how I felt about the clay while it's still fresh in my mind. And then a few days later, when I'm wrapping this up and deciding which clay I like and which one I want to use, I can remember, I can go back to these notes and remind myself how I felt about its working properties. Okay, the bowls are all dry now. At this point, I have a pretty good idea of the working qualities of each clay because I made little bowls out of them and I took good notes. I also have a good idea of the shrinkage of each of these clays because they were all made in the same pookie, and I can look at their relative size comparison one to the other. And so that's real good. I have a lot of good information already, but there's one more important test that still needs to be done, and that is firing. I need to know how they fire, how they hold up to thermal shock, things like that. I also need to know what color they fire to, and so that's the final test. Today, I'm going to fire these in a charcoal fire, and we're going to be able to see how these clays really stack up. And then I'm going to pick the winner. I'm going to go out and collect that clay. For this firing, I don't have to be particularly authentic. I just want to quickly find out how these clays perform at high temperatures. And so I'm just doing the charcoal firing in my front yard, putting those in a bricks around with a little bucket over the top to keep the fuel off of them. And I'm using briquettes. So I usually use lump charcoal. Somebody said in my last how to fire on a barbecue video that briquettes got hotter. They were wrong. So I've got a thermocouple hooked up to the firing here just to make sure, to find out if they get hotter. And I found out the same thing I found out originally, that they don't. At any rate, the firing went okay. The temperature only got up to about 700 degrees Celsius, which is good enough to make ceramics, but really not as hot as they could be if I'd used lump charcoal. Just pulled the cover sherds off here to let it cool down faster. And now it's cooled down to about 100 degrees Celsius, so plenty cool to pull the pots out. And you'll see that they're fully fired, no carbon spots or anything. The firing went really great. Okay, I got these all out of the fire. Let's talk a little bit about the results. Most of these came out really good. No cracks, no weird warpage or shrinkage or anything weird happening. The one real disappointment here is number 6, because it cracked. I don't know what caused it to crack, but if you look at the video, it cracked after this bowl came out of the firing because that little chip from the rim is sitting in the bowl in that later picture, which means it wasn't loose when I pulled it out. It was upside down. It fell after I set it down right side up. So I don't know what was going on there, if it cracked because it was cooling too fast or something, but there's something weird about 6, and that's too bad because I really liked the quality of the clay on 6. But if you look on the inside really close, there's a really tight crackled texture in there, like it's all kind of broken up into little cracks. I don't know what that means, but it's not a positive thing. It's not a clay I want to use. So unfortunately, although it had great building properties, 6 is definitely out. And it's very light. It's lighter than any of the others. And it's not because the walls are thinner. It's lighter than the other clays. And like I said, it's got some problems. Number X, which is really number 7 or number 3, this was the extra clay that I got at the end. It was terrible clay, but it came out pretty good. It came out of the firing way better than 6. So it just goes to show you can't just go on building alone. Now, I would still throw 6 out because it's terrible for building, but it goes to show that, building something with the clay is important, but that's not everything. You've got to pass it through the fire too. So X or 7 is also out. So let's look at them individually. 1 had very bad building qualities, although as a fired clay, it's really good. In fact, it's near perfect, just really fine. Number 2 also was not very good for a building clay, but again, in the firing, came out just fine. So again, you never know. Number 4 though, number 4 is the winner actually. Number 4 had great qualities for building pots with and had lots of wet strength, had good plasticity. And number 4 didn't shrink or warp or do anything funny. It came out a nice brown color, which is what we expected. In fact, they all came out almost the same shade of brown. That's kind of one of the funny things about this. If you look at these all together, you'd think they were all the same clay or they all came from very near each other, when in fact they came from miles apart. But they fired almost the same color all the way across the board, which is interesting. So what I was saying about number 4 is it's a good brown color, but the firing was near perfect on this. There's no cracks, there's nothing funny about it, and it had good quality. This was hands down the best clay here. Now going into the firing, I thought it was a toss-up between 4 and 6, but 6 lost it on the firing. Number 5, again, not a really great building clay, but came through the firing just fine. So there you have it. It really goes to show you've got to go all the way through the process to find out which clays are best. Now, number 4 is so good, and this is what I've been looking for, a good brown clay for building. I'm going back tomorrow to get a bucket or 2 of this stuff because I need a good brown clay that I can use for replication. So let's go back to Safford and grab a bucket of this stuff. All right, I'm now 140 miles away from home at the location where I got that winning number 4 clay. Now, I have this rule about not collecting body clay, that is a clay I build a pot from, more than 4 hours from my home, and I'm pretty strict about it. And the reason is, if I go 6-8 hours away from home and I collect a clay that I really like, then I need to go back. I feel compelled to go back and get more when I run out. And that's a long trip. Usually it's an overnight trip once it's 6 or 8 hours from home. By the time you drive out there, collect the clay, by the time you start heading back, it's getting dark. So I am pretty strict about it. And this is over 2 hours from my home. So it's within that range where I can easily come out here on a day trip and collect this clay. And that's why I was willing to go out here and run these experiments and collect clay out here, because it is within that range. Now, there are some clays I collect that are right on the edge of that 4 hour, maybe a tad over. And, that's pushing it. And I make some exceptions sometimes, maybe, because it's a clay I really need that I'm trying to replicate, or it's really good. But I think that's a really good rule to have, because if you're out collecting wild clays, it's really easy to find one that you really like and you love, and then you're making that trip all the time. So because this is over 2 hours from my home, it's really important that I not only collect enough to use, but I collect enough that I don't have to come back for a while. So I brought 2 buckets. I'm going to hopefully get 2 buckets of clay today. That way it'll last me for a while because it is so far away from home. So I'm going to hike in. It's not very far. It's a little ways off the road, and get that clay now. Now there's the bank of clay. As I come in here, you can see that crackled texture that tells us it's clay. And there's the bowl. There's that fired bowl from that clay. Now look at the difference in the color between the fired clay and the unfired clay. Huge difference. It's surprising that all these clays I collected from this valley all had different colors and textures, but they all fired a very similar color. And if you look at this bank, it's made up of layers of clay, many different layers of clay that was laid down by the Gila River long ago. And most of them are the same color of brown, but look. But look up here. There's a layer of green clay right in here. Do you see that? It's almost diagonal looking in there of this greenish clay. Now, green clays like that will usually fire to like a yellow or a gold color. So that might be interesting to experiment with sometime too. Why it's laid in diagonally, I have no idea, but really interesting. Anyways, this bank, the winning clay bank, or the bank that holds the winning clay, is all full of clay, and there may be different types of clay in different layers. I collected it down low where you see the bowl sitting, but it might be fun to experiment with some of these other layers and colors that are in here. Okay, I have two thoughts I want to leave you with today before I finish up. And the first of those is, don't give up looking for clay with the first clay you find. There's a lot of good clays out there. As you saw with this experiment here, I sampled in 6 different places all the way across this valley. And of those 6, only 2 had really good building properties. And of those 2, only 1 of them really passed the firing test. So 1/6 of the clays I collected were really what I was looking for, or appear to be what I was looking for. I haven't used it enough yet to really say for sure. So you might find a good clay on your first try. Then again, you might find better clay if you keep looking. So you don't have to make it, your main priority in life, finding clays, but as you drive around, keep your eyes open and take samples in different places. You might be surprised. The second point I want to leave you with is, leave your clay digging places looking as natural as possible. When you make a mess, when you leave a big gaping hole or something, you're more likely to make people upset, people who are going to come out here and put up signs to say no trespassing or no digging. Don't make a mess. Leave it looking natural and pristine, and chances are nobody is ever going to hassle you about it. So those are the 2 things. I hope you learned something today. I hope this was beneficial to you. And I appreciate you coming with me today. I'll catch you next time.